Welcome to the SISEP implementation video on the active implementation formula. Meet Principal Perkins from Freedom Elementary School. She recently facilitated the school improvement team meeting to set goals for the upcoming school year. That night, as she reflected on the meeting, she couldn't help but wonder what was missing. The literacy goal in particular was the same goal they set for the last 3 years, but her school never managed to improve student literacy outcomes to 80% proficient. Her students continually remained around 50 to 55% proficient, despite providing teachers professional development. That night, she started searching the web for literacy implementation resources and stumbled upon the active implementation formula on the AI Hub. The active implementation formula describes the factors necessary to achieve improved student outcomes. We start with the goal of achieving equitable outcomes. For example, more students reading proficiently, or fewer office discipline referrals. With our goal set, we then need to work through the formula to achieve that goal. Let's start with effective practices. We know a key ingredient to change student outcomes is to use effective instructional practices. Along with effective instruction, we need effective implementation. Teachers and staff need support to be able to use effective instruction. The final factor is enabling context, which refers to the environment and setting needed for effective instructional practices to be used well. The active implementation frameworks outline the necessary tools and activities for the 3 factors required for successful outcomes. We start with evidence-based practices to ensure they are highly usable. It is necessary that effective instruction is rooted in evidence-based practices that are teachable, learnable, doable, and accessible in practice. Moving towards effective implementation, we start with implementation stages, which take teams from identifying their needs and exploring potential evidence-based practices, through installation or planning, initial use of the practice, and finally full implementation of evidence-based practices. Then we have implementation drivers, which focus on developing competency of staff and the needed organizational processes and procedures within the school system to use evidence-based practices with fidelity. To ensure enabling contexts, we start with implementation teams, which are groups of people working towards the same mission to improve student outcomes, to intentionally use improvement cycles, to review progress and adjust as needed. This also includes forming supportive environments that focus on educational equity for all staff and students. Let's take a step back and approach this concept another way. The goal is to improve student outcomes. Given that the active implementation formula is a multiplication equation, we can demonstrate that if any of the factors are 0, let's say we do not have effective implementation, then our change in student outcomes is 0. The students will not benefit. But more likely, there will be some good parts of each factor. So let's see how this formula looks at Freedom Elementary School, striving to improve literacy outcomes for students. The Literacy Improvement Team is meeting to discuss strengths and opportunities for growth in their implementation of a literacy evidence-based practice. They chose an evidence-based practice with lessons on phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, and comprehension. But it does not have any fluency activities that give students the chance to practice phonics skills while reading text. If we could quantify this as to what percentage of the effective instruction is actually happening, we are at 80% because students are learning all the skills except fluency. Next, they had about 60% of effective implementation. Teachers were provided professional development on the evidence-based practice and used data to monitor student progress. However, teachers did not receive any coaching or follow-up support to transfer newly learned skills into their classrooms. Finally, the enabling context was a barrier. Principal Perkins and another school leader did not agree on the best approach to teaching literacy, and teachers noticed a disconnect between feedback from different administrators. This resulted in about 50% of the enabling context. Okay, so what does all this mean in terms of student outcomes? If we had 100% of each factor, students at Freedom Elementary would have the best chance of improving literacy outcomes. But if we have 80% times 60% times 50%, our total effectiveness drastically drops to 24%. With all their hard work, they are only seeing about a quarter of the effectiveness, so the outcome is deeply impacted. Principal Perkins realized that students cannot benefit from evidence-based practices they did not receive. No matter how great an evidence-based practice is, if it is not implemented well, students will not benefit. Principal Perkins realized it was up to her and an implementation team to support students and teachers. She set up a meeting for the next morning to start determining the implementation gaps and action planning. When effective practices are supported through effective implementation within enabling contexts, student outcomes improve. If you would like to learn more, check out our modules on the Active Implementation Hub. Thanks for joining us.